Another one bites the dust. Jimmy Kimmel pulled from the airways by ABC, my former employer, and I couldn't really wait to talk about it with the guest today. Rahm Emanuel, former mayor of Chicago, advisor to presidents, ambassador to Japan. He may be running for president. We talked about that and about Donald Trump's efforts to send troops into the streets of our cities. Before we get to that conversation, do yourself a favor, and us too. Like and subscribe to this channel for this and more interviews to come. So, Rahm Emanuel, you have served our country in so many ways, in so many capacities. White House Chief of Staff, Congressman, Mayor of Chicago, Ambassador to Japan. You're the perfect guy to talk to at this time. Welcome.
Thank you, Terry.
And let me ask you about the news, right? Jimmy Kimmel is off the air right now because he said something the president didn't like, his supporters didn't like, and most importantly, the head of the FCC didn't like. When you heard that ABC had pulled Jimmy Kimmel, what did you think?
Well, I mean, I have it's not a singular emotion or reaction. I had multiple. I don't think, and when you just went through my resume as an example, and I would add going back to senior advisor to President Clinton, nowhere in the time did I think I would sit there and be discussing that the President of the United States and an administration have forced a comedian, late night comedian, as an art form in the United States, as a cultural form more appropriately, like Johnny Carson, etc. That's kind of in the mind eye of the American public and our society, that two, not one, late night entertainers were forced off the air because of their open monologue. If you had asked me what's the over under that I will be commenting on that, addressing it, thinking about, never. We went through this period, and then if I step back one step, Donald Trump was trained by Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was Joe McCarthy's hatchet man. This shouldn't come as a surprise. He told you what he was going to do. One thing you got to say about Donald, he will tell you what he's going to do, and he's already said it about NBC. And he's put a target on,
Fallon.
Fallon, Seth Meyers, etc. And then a second step back, and this is the other piece, when you kind of look at what's happening. Look, corporate America as a whole has shown me to be useless and timid. The Republican members of the House and Senate that I used to not only battle with, worked with, and cooperated with on many other things, have shown me to literally have taken their manhood and put it in a lockbox. Maybe it will come out in 4 years, but basically in a lockbox. And then I take a look at the courts, outside of the lower courts, the Supreme Court, feckless. So it's down to the American people. And the interesting thing about Donald Trump is he knows where he stands, which is why he's trying to rig it with the Texas redistricting across, because he knows the verdict, because midterm elections are about him and a referendum on the Republicans. And so when I look at this whole thing, he knows what's coming. The train is moving at an incredible speed towards him and the Republicans. And whether it's redistricting, whether it's criticism of an opinion that will give a countervailing view, he is trying to change that terrain because the judgment of the American people is what he fears most.
Well, let's talk about.
And I want to say one thing to the American people. Everybody said, a lot of people in my party, the American people, their judgment is the thin blue line, because every other institutional power has failed miserably.
This is the last line of
miserably.
defense.
Yeah. And because of the FCC, I'm keeping it remarkably Emmanuel clean. They have failed. And they sit around in these country clubs and their conferences, harumphing, useless. What? Barack Obama was called a socialist because he wanted to give health care. This guy replaced the rule of law with the rule of one man.
Well, let's talk about that. I want to talk about that. So this is what the head of the FCC said, Brendan Carl, hours before Disney ABC pulled Kimmel off the air. He said, quote, referring to Jimmy Kimmel's monologue that they didn't like. This is a very, very serious issue right now for Disney. We can do this the hard way, or we can do this the easy way. These companies can find a way to take action on Kimmel, or there is going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. What do you call that, if not an authoritarian regime.
Yeah, well, I'll put the label aside. That may be the
Why?
right. I'll come to it. That may be the exact right label in an area. I'll tell you why I'm a little flummoxed about that, and it's about a lot of stuff I've been reading recently. But you have a situation like corporate leadership in media. Kimmel, Colbert, 60 Minutes, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all sued. Yourself, as we talk here, George Stephanopoulos, and the agreement ABC made very, very early on, before I think the president was sworn in. And every one of them have, not only do they have the protection of the First Amendment, clear First Amendment protections, they folded like a cheap suit.
Yeah.
And so at that level, and I do want to, and that's no different than a lot of other corporate CEOs who go in and literally they're worth themselves billions and billions of dollars, and their companies are worth trillions of dollars, and he needs them, and they act like they have no, not just dignity, but they have a set of principles, and they fold. And I want to give a shout out because he's Ken Griffin, only CEO of a major company that's spoken up and said what the president's doing, from tariffs to immigration to the rule of law, is wrong. To the universities, he's the only one. Every one of them across the business front. Now, what they tell you in private is not what they do in public.
Yeah, I mean it's all about the business interest. I just want to say, having worked for Disney,
Yeah,
is one of the most powerful companies in the world. And
yeah.
I got to say, one of the things that happened shortly after I was fired is my wife came and almost tearfully said, "We can't hate Disney, can we?" And I don't. I mean, my general attitude is, let bygones be bygones. I'm having a good time out here, but it's one of the most powerful companies in the world, right?
Yeah,
Rolling Stone is reporting that hours before Kimmel was fired, they were saying that they didn't think what he did was that wrong. The
yeah.
executives were saying, well, it's like basically not that bad. And yet they fired him anyway. They pulled off the air anyway.
Terry, since I'm a swimmer, when waves come in, they just kind of break down the barrier. And so, whether it was you starting and then George Stephanopoulos or 60 Minutes, each of these have a moment of erosion. I'm kind of more interested is whether, I assume, because it's the same week, the New York Times will stand up and fight. And I assume that's very clear about Murdoch will stand up and fight. The question is, what does NBC do? How do they react now? Because the president put a target. Is that where the erosion, or is that where the line is drawn? I don't know. So to me, I don't have a problem looking at Colbert or for that matter, Jimmy Kimmel. But the real question I'm asking is, where then in this, not the print, but in the media electronic with a wider audience, where does the line get drawn, or does it never get drawn, etc. And so, and then to the title, you use authoritarianism. I don't think that's wrong. And I want to be clear, because I do think labels you put on have connotation. I do. I just say this because obviously you mentioned my title. I just came from Japan. I don't know. I grew up in a home. My grandfather on my mother's side was a socialist. We became Democrats because of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And we grew up in a home, I joke, that being a Democrat was one of the 10 lost tribes of the Jewish people. Okay? That's how we grew up. I don't know. Roosevelt interned Japanese people who were citizens. Interned them.
And it's one of the most disgraceful things any president ever did.
And I say that as a former ambassador to Japan. I held no ambassador prior to me, and that's not to, I'm not crapping on them or whatever, I'm just observing, because we did an art show of all the artwork done, not all, but done by Japanese Americans while they were in the internment camp, and we hosted it at the U.S. residence in Japan. Had never been done before, and recognized this period of time, my gesture towards reconciliation. That was in my, you can rate them. We can sit here and do 3 shows on ranking presidents. I think Roosevelt's in the top 5. I put him number 3. That's my personal list, because behind Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. But he interned people, citizens. And so when we use titles, I know people in my party are going to scream. I think authoritarian actions using the power of the government to silence critics based on a country where the First Amendment is first and the free speech is first among all equals. And I think of the iconic image, speaking of that, of Rockwell's painting of free speech that comes from Roosevelt's Four Freedoms. And I think of that iconic image. So we are imitating the playbook of modern day leaders across the globe who have used the democratic process and then turned it against itself.
Illiberal democracies, they call it. I
Yeah,
want to press you on that,
maybe
though.
I'm trying to pay homage to my parents' liberal arts education and Hannah Arendt's distinction between totalitarianism, fascism, authoritarianism, and there are distinctions.
And
So
there are.
I'm trying to be sensitive to that
Okay, I want to push back on
without
it.
going overboard.
I want to push back on it this way. The other day, Trump got asked a question by my former colleague Jonathan Karl, one of the
Yeah,
fairest and most decent men I know, and he said, "Well, maybe we'll go after you." He
yeah,
said, and it had the tone, and much of what Trump does. This is how, but of what every petty autocrat always wants: that his whims, his resentments, his desires are the law. And that's really the personalized nature of this power. It
yeah.
is
I,
his, he
look,
aggrandizes power to himself.
and not only that, I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said, to John Carl. How about an Australian journalist asked a question? He says, "I'm calling the prime minister on you." I worked for two presidents. I don't want to say, I was in Congress and in leadership when President Bush was president. Every one of them was ridiculed, mocked, made fun of on these shows that held a mirror up. I mean, we just celebrated 50 years of Saturday Night Live.
Hmm.
Every show over the last 50 years, every show, and they developed a character who could be the stand-in for the president for his or her tenure that they could use. Saturday Night Live, and its kind of signature where it becomes part of pop culture, was because of the way they held a mirror
Hmm.
up to our society and leaders and spoke truth to power.
Yeah,
That's where we are.
this guy's too
So,
thin skinned.
yeah.
So all of this comes out of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And
Yes.
I want to, in the wake of, I want to read something you said after Charlie Kirk was killed. You said, everyone has a responsibility to act with the civic and moral code that comes with our citizenship. Past presidents have led the nation by strengthening the threads that bind Americans. Mr. President, lead us in reigniting those common virtues. More pulpit, less bully, please. And you had quotes from President Bush, President Clinton, President Obama, and Robert Kennedy Sr. So it was lovely.
Yeah.
But do you think
Senior.
Americans right now, as full of bristling with resentment and anger as we are, even listen to that kind of rhetoric anymore?
Oh, I think they're, yes. Not only do they listen to it, they're yearning for it and they want it. I mean, one, I will tell you, I put Bobby Kennedy in there. I would add Ronald Reagan was shot.
Hmm.
And a lot of people, if you talk to people that were in his government, his tenure of his presidency, think that moment turned his presidency around. Right prior to that, the wheels were coming off, and his humor, he made fun with, "I'm hoping the doctor is a Republican, not a Democrat," was a renaissance for him and a binding for him with the American people that had not happened in the first months of his presidency. And so every president, I do think the American people, and I was there during Oklahoma bombing when you had the first action taken against the government in domestic terrorism, has found and seen the responsibility of the president in moments of strife. The country's history is full with peaks and valleys of strife over all 249 plus years. And presidents have addressed it with the responsibility, especially post Roosevelt, to bind the country. And I do think the American people want it. And I think the president has an obligation and responsibility that comes with the office to represent the whole country. Now, I remind everybody 2 months ago, I think it's 2 months ago, he was in Iowa, and he called Democrats haters of America. I don't mean to make this personal. I am a Democrat. I worked ran as a Democrat. I worked for three Democratic presidents. I have 2 kids out of my 3 are serving in the United States Navy. So bizarre way to show hatred. And there are other examples. My uncle was a cop. Everybody else can show different things that they've done. So, but he has, and I say this at the end, used the bully pulpit of the presidency, first designed and described by Teddy Roosevelt, to be more bully with very little pulpit. And I do think the country yearns it. I don't think the country thinks this is normal.
You think he's overreached on this First Amendment issue in particular?
I think he's overreached on a number of things, but I do think on the First Amendment. I don't think people, this is a guess. We're 24 hours after this effect. And the reason we're all discussing this, and I happened to do something the other night, yesterday on CNN, because it's so shocking to the system. Now, do people go on with their lives, et cetera, et cetera? Do I think some people look at this as just more noise? Possible, yes. But I don't think people think this is healthy, normal, etc. when kind of stop them on the sidewalk and ask them, okay, what do you think if they put them? No, I don't. But I do think there is the bigotry of low expectations, and they don't have expectations for this president. Not that they're comfortable with it.
And I don't think they have expectations for Democrats right now. There's a sense of despair as the Trump juggernaut kind of continues to gobble up more and more power. A lot of Democrats, a lot of independents are bereft of anybody actually standing up effectively to what Trump is doing, and they're looking around. What do they see?
Well, look, that gets in, like, we're going to be here for dinner. Look, my take on this is the American people are in a desperate place economically. Everything that they believed in about the American dream, its accessibility, their kids' ability to make it, has, over a long period of time, and it's not like 4 years, but over the last 30 years, has been eroded. The ability to own a home, the ability to afford health care without going into Chapter 11, the ability to save for your retirement and not use your retirement as a backstop to your paycheck. Your kids not only succeeding in education, but succeeding better than you. Every piece of this, the foundation, has been either removed or eroded. The truth is, the Moran children, the Emanuel children, they'll be fine. You know it and I know it. But you can't have an American dream with 10% of the kids do well and 90% of the kids get a D. Can't. And they don't have access. And they know it, and they're angry. And when their backs are against the wall, that is when they expect us to show up. And we did not show up. We were off on some cultural island talking to ourselves about issues that were secondary to the bulk of the American people, maybe primary to certain people. And not only were they secondary, we made them look like they were primary. And I'm sorry, and I've said this repeatedly, again, the last 3 years I was in Japan, one child's trying to figure out their pronoun. Well, 30 other kids in the class don't know what a pronoun is. Now, can we focus on the 30 kids that don't know what a pronoun is? And I say that, look, in 2016, I dealt with bathroom access when I was mayor of Chicago. But it didn't take my eye off the ball driving graduation from 56% to 84%. It didn't take my eye off about driving reading scores and math scores to where Sean Reardon at Stanford called it the single best large city educational system. We lost focus as a party. And I say that because I'm just pulling my hair out. We're dealing with Jimmy Kimmel, a legitimate point because of his First Amendment rights. 1 week ago, we had a report card on America's education system, and we have a 30-year low reading scores and math scores. Not a word from the President of the United States. Not a word from the National Governors Association. Not a word from the National Association of Mayors. Everybody responsible. Like the three monkeys. And I'm like, as somebody who bled for education, you tell me how, as a party, you can believe in equity and be complicit and complacent with those scores
Well,
and not have your parent.
complicit. A lot of those scores have fallen because of what happened during COVID. The
That's what I'm
schools
saying.
were closed for too long, and the learning loss is devastating.
And not only closed for too long, when we knew within 6 months that you didn't need to keep schools closed. The data was, for a party that quote unquote believes in science, it was easier for people in a powerful position to throw in the towel. And now we have the consequences.
That's it.
Now, let
I'm
me
sitting
say,
in Frederick, Maryland right now, an hour outside of DC, because my wife was head of the PTA at the
yeah,
public school in DC. My kids were out of school for like a year and a half.
yeah, you, Terry, and there's this great book called Two Parent Family Privilege. As I said, our kids are going to be fine. They come from a two-parent family, loving home, but this is not everybody. And we have a responsibility. And as somebody that I can go through it from free first city to do free community college, if you got to be average, create a universal kindergarten, universal pre. It is mind-boggling to me that and what happened, and there's a solution actually to this problem, but you got to show leadership and you got to be willing to exert it. And I cannot, and this may be the son of a pediatrician. I know you think I was going to say something else, but the son of a pediatrician, somebody who wanted to be an early childhood educator in another life when I went to college. What is more responsible in public life than trying to fix a system rather than basically looking at your shoes, hoping nobody noticed that you were in power when you locked schools down for 2 years when it was pretty clear within 6 months that was not necessary.
Yeah.
And because it was more politically convenient for you, and now we have a generation that we have to dig out from from our own 30. That's where
And
we.
I mean, do you think that voters have just tuned out Democrats because of those failures and because the other issues you were talking about, the cultural issues, are so far removed that the trans thing has come to stand for those people are off on an island I don't understand?
Look, I mean, I get through both political and policy. I always remind people Bill Clinton said the economy is stupid. True. 40% of his advertising was on one issue.
Hmm. What?
Welfare as we know it. It wasn't on the economy.
Hmm.
And so there isn't these separate buckets that never meet. They were heads and tails of the same coin, showing that he was going to be a different Democrat, etc. That was his way. We kind of shortened it to Sister Soldier. President Obama, who I work for, talked about parenting and fatherhood, took on subjects that were taboo and still are taboo in our party. And when his own pastor said some very ugly things, he took on his own pastor, showing both of them, President Clinton and Obama, the leadership and inner strength that people thought was necessary to sit in that big office, in that big chair, around that big desk. And the party for 2026, this is a referendum about the Republicans and what they've done. But by 2028, which is a choice election, not a referendum election, we have to show we're going to fight for America and not just fight against Donald Trump. Here's what we're going to fight for. And to me, the cornerstone of that is the American dream. And and it's home ownership. It's the ability to save for your retirement. It's the ability to not have an insurance company tell you what part of your healthcare plan you can and can't exercise. And if we can't do that, but somehow, and I'm not, whether it's trans issue, whether it's the language around Latinx, whether it was defunding the police, that we are in some cultural island that only X percent and a shrinking X percent represents, they're never going to give you the keys to the car. And we have from John F. Kennedy to Jimmy Carter to Bill Clinton to Barack Obama, we have a template of how to run a national playbook of success. Country's much different than it was in 1960, 100%, etc. And we walked away from it.
Yeah,
we
that's
walked
so
away
interesting
from
because
our own playbook.
two things out of that. Sounds like you're running for president. It also sounds like you are breaking with your party on fundamental Democratic Party
Well,
doctrine right now, on trans, on all
yeah.
kinds of things
So
that you're taking them on.
let me first of all I haven't made the decision. Your first question, I haven't made a decision. And you don't just come back from Tokyo, which has a 12, which has a 14-hour difference, and then that's what you think about it hard, and you think about whether you have something to offer and that you think is different from other and distinguishable. And I haven't come to that conclusion yet.
Okay.
But I'm not. But as it relates to my party, look, there's a lot of things that as I told you earlier on, I'm a born and bred Democrat. I mean, I don't. Some people in the party don't think, oh, Rahm this or whatever. I don't know. I created free community college. If you got to be average, first city to do it. I didn't. Is that progressive or not progressive enough? First city anywhere, first public entity to sue the pharmaceutical industry before anybody else by 3 or 4 years. Progressive, not progressive enough. First one to create universal kindergarten pre-K as adding 2 years to 4 years to an educational system. The guy that took on the tobacco industry and plowed it into free health care, eye and dental, for children throughout the city of Chicago. 90,000 of them got free eye and dental care. The guy that took on the NRA on the assault weapon ban and the Brady Bill and passed it. The guy that took on the insurance companies and gave 10 million children health care. My view is that's what makes us Democrats. I have done the things. The largest ex-offender reentry program is the Chicago Public Transit Authority. But I'm not here scoring grades by whether I did this down a checklist of issues. And again, as I said, on the issue of trans, I dealt with it in 2016 on bathroom access. It just wasn't my identity.
And what'd you do?
I made that bathroom access. We passed an ordinance in the city council. And it was an issue that came up at that point. It was something that happened in North Carolina. But my priority as mayor was fulfilling my obligation on reading, math scores, and high school education. We live, Terry, in a period of time where you earn what you learn. I was, as mayor, responsible for the third largest public school system in America. It wasn't about bathrooms. It was about classrooms. It wasn't about locker rooms. It was about classrooms. And one of the things I'm not only most proud about, the only city, and no states copied it, we made it a requirement to get your high school diploma. You had to show us a letter of acceptance from a college, a community college, a branch of the armed forces, or a vocational school, or you did not get your high school diploma. And every child, not just the Emanuel children, had to have a plan of what they were doing next. And I say that by way of this. My big analysis, all my readings and etc., my big analysis is Bill Clinton leaves office. America was at the top of its game, militarily and economically and strategically. Our enemies called it the unipolar world. We handed it off, and we basically went to war in Iraq, a war of choice, and China won. We spent all of America's power over there. So my view, I did this as a member of Congress on the American Parity Act, invest in America and we'll beat China. You don't invest in America and China will beat America. And we have taken our eye off the ball.
I got a few minutes, and I do want to get to another issue that Trump has raised, and that is how he's using his powers. Trump sent troops to L.A. and D.C., declaring a crime emergency, that there were riots and all the rest of it. He's put that on hold because Chicago stood up to him, right? He said Chicago's next. But I
have a theory. I have a theory of that.
Well, there's Governor Pritzker and there's Mayor Johnson, who both stood up to him, and maybe he's not that strong. But I wonder this. Mayor Bowser here in D.C. said it did a lot of good. Crime did come down.
Yeah.
Maybe given Chicago's atrocious murder rate, why not? Why not welcome the feds in if they can help?
Yeah, first of all, that's not the answer. Now, as somebody, well, I'm going to walk you through it, is because these are sustained efforts. They're not flash in the pants, performative, a National Guard for 3 weeks. If you go through what the successful period of the 90s through the early 2000s of what New York did, other periods in Chicago, I can give you data when I was in tenure, but other type of examples are Los Angeles. They're year in and year out. Now, in my view, as somebody that would beg for a day that kids could walk to school thinking of their studies and not their safety, dying to would do anything to drive through a neighborhood without yellow ribbons around a tree and balloons and photos of kids that were senselessly shot down in a crossfire between gang members and drug gangs. Anything for that. Crime is a problem. And nobody walks around, contrary to all the rhetoric, I feel 22% safer in 2024. It's the stupidest argument I've ever heard. Safety is whether kids can go to school.
Yeah.
And safety is whether a family can sit on the front porch or not, or they have to sit behind the closed door. That's safety. That's what public safety is. Now, it is a combination of things, Terry, that go across the spectrum. It's not defunding the police, and it's not the National Guard. It's responsible policing at a full force equal to what you need to do. Police on the street, kids, guns, and gangs off the street. That's the strategy. We got school back in, resources for after-school programs. So kids aren't on the street when the bell goes off, but around a responsible adult doing athletic things, artistic things, or academic things. It's making sure the 2% that commit the overwhelming crime have the full force of both the federal, state, and local on them and prosecuting them for the gun crimes they commit. It's also making sure that the guns and drugs that come in here, we have the right operations. But that is and I'm leaving a lot out of the ecosystem of how to deal with public safety. You look at all the research coming out of the crime lab of the University of Chicago, out of other great people that work on this. It is a sustained effort over a period of time that creates the space then for economic opportunity to take over. And to me, the National Guard treats every other aspect of the city as either an occupying force or as the enemy. It's not that you don't need resources. Of course you need resources. I'm just saying this one reference, it's not the point. When I left office, there were 13,400 cops. There's 11,900 now. I'd do anything. Give me the money that you're going to spend on the National Guard so I can hire and train and recruit 500 more police officers. Give me the money that you're going to spend there, and I can keep 40,000 kids in after-school programs. To me, that's a sustained effort that takes the momentum that was built in 2023 and 2024 and pushes it into 2025. You do have cities getting close to 50, like Baltimore and Detroit, 50-year lows on crime. Now, are they where you want them? No, nobody should be complacent. Does it mean that what you're doing is failing? It doesn't mean that either. And cities of America are not to be occupied as if they're the enemy.
Yeah, but Trump has this way. I mean, that makes sense. Systemic reform and commitment. Trump just says, let's go get them. Let's go get the bad guys.
Yeah, I understand. Look, there is no doubt. If you look at research, look at all the data and research and everything, a small sliver of any city commits an exponentially higher amount of crime. Bring all the resources onto that. And while you're doing it, build the other pieces that are necessary to sustain it. But that requires partnering. Now, I happen to think, I'm not a mayor anymore. I've sat down with a couple mayors and talked to them. I think the mayor's conference should say, here's the bill of goods. Be a partner. There's a cop's office created on the 94 crime bill, fully funded. So cities can both recruit police officers, train them appropriately, and deploy them. Be a partner and fund, not cut, both the after-school and summer activities program. So you actually, when the bell is off, either at the end of the year or the end of the day, kids have a safe, secure place to go. Be a partner in prosecuting these punks that have basically taken over neighborhoods and using those neighborhoods as their drug market. Nobody would be happier than the residents in those communities. But partner. When you send the National Guard and say, this is what I'm doing. No, you work with somebody. You and I are doing this interview. We just watched the president talking about his relationship with UK. Treat cities as a partner. They know what they're doing. And what they don't do, you can say, here's what I'm going to do in this city. And Chicago's problems are different than Cleveland. Cleveland's problems are different than Aurora, Colorado. Work with them. Pick up the phone and say, what do you need?
Rahm, you speak from such a well of experience, and I wonder if that's a disadvantage today, that in an outsider era, you're just too much of an insider, and that counts against you.
Well, that may be true. And we'll see. I mean, first of all, I haven't made that decision. But the second of all is, nobody thought I was an insider or outsider when I was the guy that took on the NRA and nobody else has. Nobody thought I was an insider or outsider when I took on the insurance companies for 10 million kids to get their health care. Nobody thought I was insider or outsider when I was the most prominent fighter against not only the pharmaceutical industry, but the tobacco industry, and put those resources into our kids. And I'll say it, and nobody thought I was an outsider when I was willing to fight to basically recreate an educational system. The outsider is the guy that's the fighter. The insider is the guy that folds. And nobody would ever look at Rahm Emanuel and go, well, there's a guy, cheap suit that just folds every time.
So whether it's you, as it might be, or any Democrat, do you think they're running against Donald Trump in 2028 or Donald Trump Jr.?
I said it again, so let me be emphatic. No, I don't think that. And I think the most incumbent thing, when I look back at the time, Terry, the party made a mistake. President Obama gets elected. It's transformational. You just can't argue with it. And they say, and at that time in 2008, after 8 years of President Bush, demographics is destiny. And they fall asleep intellectually. And we become the fattest, sloppiest party from a policy perspective. Just a fact. Not over 1 year, but over a period of time. And I'll give you an example. Jimmy Carter creates the Department of Education. Bill Clinton creates public school choice and teachers of excellence. Barack Obama creates race to the top on education. We have a 25-point advantage over Republicans on education. Name me Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's education policy.
Yeah, I can't.
Okay, we became intellectually, policy-wise, sloppy. Now, I've laid out my thing with you. We could go on and do a couple shows on it. But to me, that's an example where we made the mistake. And in 2028, the party needs to show that it's going to show up and fight for the American dream. And that's the bottom line. We're not going to just fight Donald Trump. We're going to fight for you.
So you mentioned Barack Obama. Where is he? He's still the most popular politician in America by some measures. What's he doing?
First of all, you should get him on the show if you want him. I'm not here to. I was his chief of staff. I did my tour of duty.
But seriously, don't you think? Look, I mean, I know there's this tradition of former presidents don't beat up on their successors. Well, Trump certainly blew that out of the water, but so did Harry Truman and others. Shouldn't he have a bigger role, a bigger voice?
Yes and no. I actually understand. It's not just the kind of decorum of the office, because one is, I want to be careful. I've always had a practice. I don't speak out of school on conversations with presidents, either President Bush or others. I understand the desire to make space for others to emerge, but also the responsibility at this moment. It's not a normal time. So you got kind of a two-track going on. But you are asking me, where is he? And the very week he just spoke up about things. So he's obviously present.
Yeah.
And I spent 2 years of my life speaking for him. I'm not going to do it.
But would you like to see that kind of leadership that he can bring out there more, confronting Trump?
Well, I think, again, I just told you what I think is, I don't know for a fact, but my guess is there's this calculation between how do I not steal a spotlight from another generation to come about. On the other hand, that we are not in normal times, and therefore I have an obligation. So I think he is. Okay.
Last question. Cade Horton, Rookie of the Year?
He is, I would say yes, but that's showing you that's a guy that lives 6 blocks from Wrigley Field, but it's an incredible pitch. I'll say that.
They're going to the playoffs, so.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. They're going to the playoffs. And it's actually been I wouldn't say bizarre, but an uneven season. And I'm hoping they are in the upswing of this season.
I feel it. I feel
Yeah,
it. Go
and
Cubs.
yeah, they do have two Japanese players.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I have. There's a great anecdote story about Suzuki, etc. So it's I played a 2%, 1% role.
In bringing Seiya to Chicago.
Yeah, very very small role, but it's yeah.
That may be the best thing he did when you're ambassador to Japan
Well, I take insult, and now we're ending on an insult. I have a
then.
few. All
No,
right,
I
guys.
meant Seiya's amazing. So
Yeah, he is. I know that. Yeah, I feel like the U.S. Japan Korea alliance was pretty good.
all right, Ram, thank you very much. Appreciate it.